2022, the then Home Secretary, Grant Shapps, issued a profound and formal public apology to the victims of child sexual abuse so badly let down over decades by different levels of the state. As Shadow Home Secretary at that time, I joined him in that apology on behalf of the opposition and extended it to victims of child sexual exploitation too. To the victims and survivors of sexual exploitation and grooming gangs, on behalf of this and past governments and the many public authorities who let you down, I want to reiterate an unequivocal apology for the unimaginable pain and suffering that you have suffered and the failure of our country's institutions through decades to prevent that harm and keep you safe. But words are not enough. Victims and survivors need action. The reforms I've set out today will mean the strongest action any government has taken to tackle child sexual exploitation, more police investigations, more arrests, a new inquiry, changes to the law to protect children, and a fundamental overhaul of the way organisations work to support victims and put perpetrators behind bars. But none of this will work unless everyone is part of it, unless everyone works together to keep our children safe. I commend this statement to the House.
Right. Hopefully it's now available in the table office for those members who wish to see the report. The other thing is, the Home Secretary quite rightly took longer than expected, and I have no problem with that. Just to say to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi, and the same is available as well, and to Lib Dems. Kemi Bedell.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of this statement. Although I must say, I couldn't believe my ears, listening to the Home Secretary's statement as if this was their plan all along, when we all know it is another U-turn. After months of pressure, the Prime Minister has finally accepted our calls for a full statutory national inquiry into the grooming gangs. And I welcome that we have finally reached this point. And we must remember that this is not a victory for politicians, especially the ones like the Home Secretary who had to be dragged to this position, or the Prime Minister. This is a victory for the survivors who have been calling for this for years. I have been speaking to many who do not have confidence that a government that ignored their concerns will deliver. But before I turn to the detail of the Home Secretary's statement, I want to recognise the tireless work of those who refuse to let this issue be buried. Survivors like Fiona Goddard, who bravely waived her anonymity, and the parents of survivors like Marlon West, who I spoke to this morning. Maggie Oliver, whose courage in speaking truth to power has been instrumental in bringing us to this point. The late Andrew Norfolk, whose fearless journalism brought these crimes to light, Baroness Casey for her review, and Charlie Peters, who has consistently been a voice for the voiceless. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's handling of this scandal is an extraordinary failure of leadership. His judgment has once again been found wanting. Since he became Prime Minister, he and the Home Secretary dismissed calls for an inquiry because they did not want to cause a stir. They accused those of us demanding justice for the victims of this scandal as, and I quote, jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Yes. A claim the Prime Minister's official spokesman restated this weekend. Shameful. It has been left to Conservatives time and time again to force this issue. 3 times, Mr. Speaker, 3 times. They can mutter now. They all mutter now. 3 times, Mr. Speaker, these Labour MPs voted against the national inquiry. They voted against it 3 times. Liberal Democrats didn't bother to vote at all, asleep at the wheel. Labour MPs voted against a reasoned amendment to the Children's Bill. At committee stage of that bill, they voted against. At committee stage of the crime and policing...
Mr. Swallow, I want you to set a good example. It's a very serious debate. Temps are running high, but I certainly don't want you to see you pointing and shouting and bawling in that way. Okay, Ben.
Mr. Speaker, they can point and shout as much as they like. They know the truth as we on the side of the House do. Yes. 3 times. I will repeat myself, Mr. Speaker, 3 times. Labour MPs voted against the Reason Amendment to the Children's Bill. At committee stage of that bill, they voted against. At committee stage of the Crime and Policing Bill, they voted against a national inquiry. And at Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister repeatedly ruled out a national inquiry to the chairs of all of these Labour MPs who are now pretending this is what they believed all along. And no doubt, the Home Secretary, in her response to me, will try and claim that the previous government did nothing. Yes. A wholly false assertion that she should not repeat today. The Conservative government took extensive action, starting with the original J report, commissioned in 2014 by the then Home Secretary Theresa May. A year later, she commissioned the independent investigation into child sexual abuse, and Sajid Javid commissioned ethnicity data collection in 2018. So it is wrong, as the Home Secretary said, to claim that ethnicity data collection had not been done, and I will remind her that the Foreign Secretary criticised Sajid Javid at the time, said he was bringing the Office of Home Secretary into disrepute, and said he was pandering to the far right for doing exactly what she says she's doing now. They should be ashamed of themselves. We accepted all the recommendations of that previous child sexual inquiry of 2022, except the one to have a new cabinet minister, which would not have made any difference at all to the victims of this scandal. The Home Secretary claimed that the recommendations sat on the shelf. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. We went further than those recommendations. It was the Conservatives who established the Grooming Gangs Task Force, which supported police forces to make 807 arrests for group-based child sexual exploitation last year. So don't tell me we did nothing. It is vital, Mr. Speaker, that this inquiry is robust, swift, and above all, independent. There are legitimate concerns about institutions investigating themselves, especially as some of the most egregious cases of institutional failure occurred in Labour-controlled authorities. They can moan as much as they like, Mr. Speaker, but the people out there believe that is why nothing has happened yet. In Greater Manchester, Operation Augusta was prematurely shut down. In Rotherham, under continuous Labour control since 1974, we saw repeated failures. In Telford, where Labour has predominantly held power, the current MP initially rejected calls for an inquiry while serving as council leader. This inquiry must have teeth. It must start with known hotspots like Bradford and Rochdale, and I commend my honourable friend, the member for Keighley, for his persistent advocacy of this issue. We need clear commitments, Mr. Speaker. For example, will the inquiry examine the role of ethnicity in these crimes, confronting hard truths about potential cover-ups motivated by fears of appearing racist? There's no point then muttering. The Home Secretary said it herself. I spoke to the father of a survivor just this morning, and he told me the survivors need to have someone who is independent that they can go to and trust. It is no use them being forced to speak to the same authorities who ignored them in the first place. So will this inquiry ensure that no one, whether police officers, councillors or council officials, is beyond scrutiny? The government's approach to the Casey review itself raises serious concerns. While the review's findings are crucial, we as legislators are sent here to make decisions, not to outsource the difficult ones. The Prime Minister has waited months for someone to take this decision for him. This is the kind of dithering and delay that the survivors complained about. Mr. Speaker, we need answers to the following questions. The House deserves to know what changed the Prime Minister's mind from thinking this was dog whistle far-right politics to something he must do. When exactly did Baroness Casey submit her findings to Downing Street, and did the government request any changes to her report? Does she agree that anyone in authority who deliberately covered up these disgusting crimes should be prosecuted for misconduct in public office, and those prosecutions should happen alongside, not after, the inquiry? Because we believe that anyone in the police, local authorities, social services, or even the CPS who covered this up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls as young as 10 years old should be pursued. And we welcome her comments about perpetrators not being able to make asylum claims. I will remind the Home Secretary that we put forward an amendment in the Borders Bill, and she and all her colleagues voted against that very measure. So does she now agree the perpetrators should also not be able to make human rights claims to avoid deportation, and will she legislate to do that? Will the inquiry be concluded within 2 years, and will every one of the 50 towns affected be covered, including Bradford, which is still refusing to conduct an inquiry into this? And will those local inquiries have the power to summon witnesses, or is that power only for the national inquiry? And most critically, we need a clear timeline for conclusions and actions. The victims cannot wait another decade for justice. We should be able to do this in 2 years. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we didn't need to commission a report to tell us what we already knew. So will she apologise on behalf of herself, the Labour Party and the Prime Minister for wasting so much time and voting against this, dismissing the concerns of the survivors? The House, the British public, and most importantly, the many brave survivors deserve clear answers from a government of dithering and delay.
What was the answer you gave the Telford survivors?
I have to say to the Leader of the Opposition, I don't think she can have read this report and the seriousness of its conclusions, because it sets out a timeline of failure from 2009 to 2025. Repeated reports and recommendations that were not acted on child protection, on police investigations, on ethnicity data, on data sharing, on support for victims. For 14 of those 16 years, her party was in government, including years when she was the Minister for Children and Families, then the Minister for Equalities, covering race and ethnicity issues and violence against women and girls. And I didn't hear her raise any of these issues until January of this year. She will know the Prime Minister didn't just raise them, he acted on them, bringing the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, calling for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And she will know that the Safeguarding Minister and I have raised these issues repeatedly. She referred to the Professor Alexis J. independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. I called for and strongly supported that inquiry, and also on a cross-party basis. We wanted that inquiry to work and supported its conclusions. But her party did absolutely nothing to implement those conclusions. Time and again, recommendations just sitting on the shelf. And it has taken this government now to bring forward the mandatory duty to report. And she says that we should ensure that people who have engaged in cover-ups should be prosecuted. I agree, and that is why this party is changing the law to make that possible, so that cover-ups cannot happen and so that people are held to account. She'll also know that the votes she's referred to, what she wanted to do, and the amendment she put forward, would have wrecked the children's well-being and schools bill. The very bill which includes 2 of Baroness Casey's recommendations strengthening child protection, recommendations that she and her party refused to introduce over 14 years. And I am sorry that she chose not to join in the apology to victims and survivors for decades of failure that was a cross-party apology in 2022. And it should be again if she really had victims' interests and the national interest at heart.
More war.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I listened, I sat with a cold fury at what was coming out of the mouth of the Leader of Opposition. Because much of it is beneath contempt. Can I commend today's statement, and can I commend her for commissioning a fiercely independent figure like Louise Casey to conduct this national audit, without which we would not have had today's outcome. In Rochdale, we know all too well how many years it has taken for victims to get the justice they deserve. They have waited many, many years to see these sick criminals locked up and put behind bars. But also, I mean, only last week we had 7 more of these perverts locked up in Rochdale, and that is a testimony to the police and the prosecution who finally got these cases together. But the victims also want accountability for anyone in a position of authority. As she has said, anyone who found out about this and failed to act, or knew about it and failed to act. So does she agree with me that no councillor of any political party, no social worker, no police officer, no council officer and no ethnic group should hide from the fierce scrutiny of this national inquiry?
My honourable friend is right to raise the appalling case in his constituency where 7 people were convicted on Friday, and he will know as well that there are further criminal investigations still ongoing as well, and it is shameful how long it has taken to get justice for those victims. I also agree with him that there can be no hiding from justice for anyone on this appalling issue where victims and survivors have been let down for far too long, and I would hope that this could be a cross-party process to support that.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Child sexual abuse and exploitation are among the most abhorrent crimes imaginable, and we must all support every effort to deliver justice for victims and to prevent these vile acts from happening again. It is, of course, right that the government follows the recommendations of Baroness Casey's report, including a new national inquiry. Survivors must be at the heart of this process. Their voices, experiences and insights must shape both the inquiry and its outcomes. And I would welcome hearing more from the Home Secretary on how she intends to ensure survivors are heard, respected and central to this view, building on their existing testimony without asking to repeat themselves and relive their abuse again and again. Mr. Speaker, the 7-year inquiry into child sexual abuse, chaired by Professor Alexis Jay, delivered its final report in 2022, and the government at the time delivered none of its recommendations, leaving survivors waiting for justice. In her remarks, the Home Secretary mentioned 2 of Professor Jay's recommendations being introduced through the Crime and Policing Bill: mandatory reporting duty and aggravated offences for grooming offenders. But what does this new inquiry mean for the remaining recommendations of Professor Jay? Will victims and survivors see all 20 recommendations implemented while the new inquiry is being carried out? Any new inquiry must be more than symbolic. It must be robust, victim-centred and capable of driving real change. A duty of candour would require public officials and authorities to cooperate fully with an inquiry like this. So it continues to be disappointing that the government has delayed bringing this forward. I ask the Home Secretary plainly, what is stopping the government from introducing a duty of candour via a Hillsborough law now? Finally, now that Baroness Casey has completed her review, I welcome her appointment as chair of the Independent Commission into Adult Social Care. I trust she will bring to that hugely important role the same determination to challenge injustice and champion the voices of those too often left unheard.
The honourable member makes important points about the seriousness of this crime. She is right too that we need to continue to implement the recommendations of the overarching inquiry into child abuse. The Safeguarding Minister updated the House before Easter on those recommendations and the action that we are taking forward on those. I can tell her that a lot of the Home Office measures are already well underway as well, and we will continue to do that. It's really important important that we don't simply have recommendations sitting on shelves, that things have to be implemented. On the Hillsborough law, we are working at pace to get the details right and bring it before the House. She will understand that it needs to meet the expectations of the Hillsborough families, as well as be right for the House too. And we will continue to work on the wider issues as well. Baroness Casey in her foreword says, if we'd got this right years ago, seeing these girls as children raped rather than wayward teenagers or collaborators in their abuse, collecting ethnicity data and acknowledging as a system that we did not do a good enough job, then I doubt we'd be in this place now. We lost a decade, we can't lose another one.
Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for her leadership and commitment to get a grip on this issue. As a Member of Parliament for one of the largest constituencies of Muslim and Pakistani heritage people, Muslims, I know the sheer anger and condemnation that the vast majority of them share, like all Britons, against those that commit these vile actions and vile sexual abuse. This is not only backed by recent polling by Opinion that shows Muslims are deeply concerned, majority of them, about grooming gangs, but by sermons in mosques, letters from leading figures, demonstrations on the streets, and so much more, often not given the media coverage that they deserve. I am pleased to see the National Crime Agency will be involved in the future inquiries, and let me reiterate in this House that British Muslims stand on the side of victims and support the full force of the law against all perpetrators of abuse. But would the Home Secretary agree with me that those that display selective outrage or fan the flames to blame entire communities do nothing to protect innocent victims or further the cause of victims?
Can I welcome my honourable friend's point that she makes about the anger in her community, the anger across British Muslim communities towards the grooming gangs, towards the rape of children, towards these appalling crimes, and the work that she has long called for, including stronger action from the police to be able to go after perpetrators and bring them to justice. She is right that this is shared right across communities, is the horror at crimes committed against children and particularly against young girls. It is in the interests of those children and of those victim survivors that we have reforms now.
The First Select Committee, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for early sight of it. I'm pleased also that Baroness Casey has agreed to come before the committee tomorrow to set out her report more clearly to us. I am concerned about the potential for inquiries trying to get to the truth, potentially prejudicing criminal trials. So could she set out how she envisages the two things running alongside each other, an inquiry and criminal prosecutions?
Can I welcome that question from the Select Committee Chair, and I am glad that Baroness Casey will have the opportunity to set out more details of her findings. As the Chair will know, the Baroness Casey has huge expertise and determination and will be forthright in giving the evidence that she has drawn together. She makes a very important point, and it will be important for the Independent Commission, for the Independent Inquiry, to have arrangements with police forces to ensure that where there are current criminal investigations underway, they are not cut across, but so that we also ensure that we can uncover where there have been institutional failings, because it's those institutional failings to pursue action or to turn a blind eye towards action that need to be pursued in particular areas as part of those local investigations and as part of the national inquiry. She'll know that these kind of arrangements have been done in inquiries in the past, so they can be done and will need to be so again now.
Sean Davies.
First, I want to praise and pay tribute to survivors from right across the country, and again highlight the survivors who worked in Telford alongside myself and other organisations to do that local-based review. The reason we did a local-based review was because the then Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, and the then local government minister, Rishi Sunak, refused to provide a statutory inquiry into Telford. And that's why we worked together with the Police and Crime Commissioner, who happens to be a Conservative, and people from across the political spectrum to take this out of the party political field and try and find answers in our small part of the world. Mr. Speaker, what we do need, though, is action. Action in regards to the J inquiry, action in regards to the Casey review, but also, Home Secretary, the number of local reviews that have taken place up and down this country that have not been on the desks of ministers over the last 14 years and have not therefore received the attention that they deserve. Does she agree?
My honourable friend is right to say what we need is change and action. Recommendations from inquiries need to be implemented. The Telford inquiry that took place had as part of its strength was that it involved victims and survivors at the very heart of the inquiry, and also had serious plans to ensure that the recommendations were then taken forward and implemented, and had ways in which to follow up to make sure that those recommendations were implemented. That is crucial. It's no good just having inquiries where recommendations sit on a shelf.